What happens next inside your brain is nothing like what you've been told your entire life, and scientists have the proof. I'm the Mystery Science, and if that question just made your heart drop a little, hit subscribe, because we go deep into the science most people never hear about. Now here's what almost nobody talks about. Dying isn't one experience. It's 3 completely different ones, and your brain handles each of them in a way that will genuinely surprise you. Let's break them down. When you get a terminal diagnosis, cancer, organ failure, a disease with no cure, your brain does something counterintuitive. It doesn't give you peace. It doesn't give you clarity. The very first thing it does is refuse to believe what it just heard. This isn't weakness. This is your brain doing its job. Psychologists call this denial, but neuroscientists call it something more specific, a protective inhibition response. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for processing future projections, essentially short circuits when it receives information that contradicts your survival instinct. Your mind quite literally cannot reconcile the idea of your own non-existence with the reality it's built around you. Think about that. Your brain has spent every second of your life building a model of the future with you in it. A diagnosis strips that model apart in under 30 seconds, and the brain's first move is to reject the data entirely. Over the following days and weeks, something else happens. The body starts changing, slowly, quietly, in ways most people have never heard described. And this is where the science gets genuinely fascinating and a little unsettling.
But before we get there, I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually answer this in the comments. If you found out today that you had 1 month to live, what would be the very first thing you would do? Don't think too hard, just the first thing that comes to mind. Drop it below, because the answer might tell you something important about who you actually are. Now, back to that slow dying process, because what happens in the final days is unlike anything Hollywood has ever shown you. As the body begins shutting down over weeks or months, the brain starts rationing. It begins to prioritize. Sleep increases dramatically, not because the person is giving up, but because the brain is conserving energy, the way a phone on 1% battery starts dimming its screen. The outer functions go first: social engagement, movement, hunger. The core systems stay online as long as possible. The skin changes. It becomes cool, sometimes mottled with a bluish or purple pattern. This happens because the cardiovascular system is making a brutal executive decision: redirect blood flow to the vital organs and let the extremities go. The body is triaging itself. Breathing becomes irregular, long pauses followed by sudden deep breaths. This pattern even has a name: Cheyne-Stokes respiration. It sounds alarming, but it's not a sign of pain. It's a sign of a brainstem doing the only thing it knows how to do: keep the lungs cycling as long as physically possible. And then something even stranger happens. People in the final hours sometimes begin talking to people who aren't in the room, people who died years earlier, mothers, friends, children who passed before them. The medical world used to call this hallucination. Neuroscience now has a cleaner explanation: cerebral hypoxia.
When the brain runs low on oxygen, the hippocampus, your memory center, starts misfiring. It blends stored memories with present perception. The brain can no longer sort what is real from what is remembered, and so it presents both simultaneously. Is it terrifying? For the person watching, often yes. For the person experiencing it, almost certainly not. Because by this point, the brain no longer has the metabolic resources to generate fear. It is simply too depleted. It doesn't go out in panic. It goes out like a signal fading, gradually, then completely. And here's the part that surprises most people. In this slow version of dying, there is no dramatic final moment of terror, no sudden awareness that the end is here. The brain is already too far gone for that. It just steps back, quietly, without ceremony. But that's only one way to die knowing that death is coming. The second version is nothing like this, and the brain responds in a way that feels almost impossible. Picture this scenario. You're on a commercial flight. Somewhere over the middle of the country, there's a sound. Wrong, metallic, loud. The aircraft shudders. The oxygen masks drop from the ceiling. Through the window, you can see that something is on fire. The plane is descending at an angle that makes no sense. You look around and you know, not suspect, not fear, you know with complete certainty that this plane is not going to land safely. There is no call button that helps you here. There is no running. There is no negotiating. In that moment, every human being who has survived a situation like this reports the same thing happening inside their mind, and it is the last thing you would ever expect. The fear disappears, not gradually, not slowly. It vanishes.
And in its place comes something that survivors struggle to put into words, a kind of crystalline clarity, a slowing of time, a sharpening of every detail, the sound of the engines, the face of the person in the seat beside them, the color of the overhead light. Everything becomes almost unbearably precise. Neuroscientists call this the paradoxical calm, and it has a very specific mechanism. When the amygdala, the brain's threat detection system, determines that a threat is completely unescapable and that no action will change the outcome, it shuts down the panic response. Not because the danger isn't real, but because panic is only useful when there is something you can do. When there isn't, panic costs energy and clarity with zero return, so the brain eliminates it. What follows is dissociation. The brain activates a protective split between emotional processing and conscious experience. You're still there, still aware, still seeing and hearing everything, but you're no longer emotionally inside the scene. Survivors describe it as watching themselves from slightly outside their body, feeling strangely detached, present but untouched. This isn't spiritual. This isn't supernatural. This is a 200,000-year-old survival system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Give you your last few seconds of cognitive function at maximum capacity, even when that capacity can't save you. The slowing of time has a neurological explanation too. Under extreme stress, the brain floods itself with norepinephrine, which causes it to process sensory information at a higher rate than normal. More information per second means time feels like it's stretching. You're not experiencing slow motion. You're experiencing accelerated perception. And this brings us to the third scenario, the one that has inspired more books, more documentaries, more religious experiences, and scientific debates than almost any other phenomenon in human history. What happens when you die and then come back? Near-death experiences, that clinical term is NDEs, have been documented across cultures, across centuries, across people with no prior religious belief and people with profound faith, and the descriptions are almost always the same. A feeling of total peace, the sensation of leaving the body and observing it from above, a panoramic review of your life's memories, and the tunnel, that overwhelming, luminous tunnel with a light at the end that feels more real than anything you've ever seen. For a long time, this was purely the domain of theology. Then neuroscience started paying attention. What they found is extraordinary, not because it confirms the supernatural, but because it reveals just how powerful a dying brain can be. The out-of-body sensation, that feeling of floating above yourself and watching events from an external point of view, occurs because of a breakdown in multisensory integration. Your brain normally combines visual signals, auditory signals, and proprioceptive signals, the sense of where your body is in space, into a single coherent experience of being located inside your body. When oxygen drops rapidly, this integration collapses, the signals desynchronize, and the brain, unable to locate itself through normal means, defaults to an external perspective. It places your point of view outside your body because it has lost the data it needs to place it inside. The tunnel of light is even more precisely explained. The visual cortex is among the first regions to be affected by oxygen deprivation.
As it begins to fail, neurons fire in a disorganized cascade, not controlled, not intentional, just chaotic electrical discharge. The result is a perception of darkness closing in from the periphery, while the center of your visual field becomes overwhelmingly bright. You're not seeing a mystical passageway. You're watching your visual system shut down from the inside. The life review, that rapid, panoramic flood of memories, happens because the hippocampus loses its ability to sequence information chronologically. Memory normally plays back in order. When the hippocampus is hypoxic, it releases memories in fragments, in bursts, without structure, and the conscious mind, desperate to make meaning, interprets that burst as a fast-forward review of everything you've ever lived. And the peace, that absolute, consuming, profound sense of calm that people describe as the most beautiful thing they have ever felt, that is neurochemistry. A dying brain releases a surge of endorphins, serotonin, and possibly dimethyltryptamine, compounds that are among the most powerful mood-altering substances the body can produce. Fear is chemically suppressed,
Pain is chemically suppressed. What remains is the raw experience of consciousness without distress. Here is the most important thing to understand about all of this. None of these experiences happen at death. They happen at the border. They happen in the seconds when the brain is failing but has not yet stopped generating experience. They are, in the most literal sense, the last show the brain ever puts on. And the reason we know about them at all is because the people who had them came back, which means they didn't fully cross. They stood at the edge, experienced the edge, and returned to tell us what the edge feels like.
So what do all three of these scenarios have in common? None of them were designed by evolution to help you understand death. Not one. The denial that comes with a diagnosis exists to protect you from emotional collapse so you can keep functioning. The paradoxical calm in a crisis exists to maximize your cognitive output in the final seconds. The tunnel and the peace of a near-death experience exist because a brain losing oxygen becomes, briefly, a brain without fear, and nothing more. Every single one of these mechanisms serves survival, even the ones that activate when survival is already impossible, because evolution doesn't know that. Evolution built these systems millions of years before humans had the ability to reflect on their own mortality. The hardware runs the same program whether it can save you or not. And yet, and this is where science runs out of answers, none of this explains what happens to consciousness after the last signal fires. None of it explains where the experience goes when there is no longer a brain generated. Neuroscience can map exactly how a brain dies. It can explain every phenomenon along the way with remarkable precision. But it cannot tell you what happens to the awareness that was having those experiences. That question, what happens to the thing that is experiencing all of this, remains genuinely, completely, honestly open. Not because scientists haven't looked, they have, but because the answer, if there is one, hasn't arrived through any instrument we currently have. Here is what I think is worth taking away from all of this, and I say this not as a spiritual claim, but as a logical one. If you spend time thinking about what happens when we die, you will eventually hit a wall. The science takes you 99% of the way. It explains the chemistry, the neurology, the evolutionary logic, and then it stops. And in that remaining 1%, every person throughout human history has been left alone with the same question. Not what happens to the body, we know that, but what happens to the voice inside you that has been narrating your entire life. The fact that your brain will do everything in its power to keep you from thinking about this, denial, distraction, psychological avoidance, might be the most honest proof that this question matters more than any other. Because if the answer were simple, we wouldn't spend so much energy avoiding it. I'm the Mystery Science. If this made you think, subscribe. We do this every week. And before you go answer that comment question I asked earlier, because I genuinely want to know what your first instinct was. See you in the next one.